Welcome back, comrades, to Utopian Cartography, for another expedition into the unknown regions of the future to discover hope, real hope, beyond the illusions handed down to us by previous generations that greed is good and war is inevitable, because there will just never be enough to go around. As George Carlin said, it's all bullshit, folks. It's bad for you. I'm your host, Neonn Felicity. I'm here to tell you that we can have a positive future. Our guest on today's voyage is Darin Leong, visionary producer of the Imagine Music and Arts Festival and the Imagine Convergence, as well as the production manager of The Compass, which hosts the philosophy content at Lightning in a Bottle. We met last year at LIB, where we worked on building all the spaces where the epic knowledge would be dropped on thousands of open-minded festival goers during the event. We camped next to each other during the build and strike, so we got to have lots of deep conversations about the state of the world and the urgent need for a collective expansion of awareness about the death and destruction wrought by the old paradigm, clinging for its dear life in the face of a new transcendent epoch of conscious community building in the rubble. I loved his perspective on this whole movement, from the warehouses of the 90s underground rave scene, bubbling up and blossoming into a whole new world that rejects the default state of isolation in consumer society, for a more holistic vision of togetherness and tribal cohesion. In the conversation you're about to hear, we discuss the evolution of the rave phenomenon towards a gentler, more elegant exhibition of psychedelic creativity, in collaboration with intellectual artists of all different mediums, with profound insights about the human experience that can raise people's quality of life by showing how things can be radically different than society dictates. We talk about the nature of transformation of these gatherings, what is being transformed, and how it got into this deformed, distorted paradigm in the first place, through religious and commercial conditioning, and parallels to instances of metamorphoses in the natural world, and how adaptation to changing circumstances is the very essence of evolution itself. We explore the reasons why these events are transformational, what elements of the experience are combining to catalyze the deep shift in consciousness that occurs with such regularity at these neo-shamanic tribal gatherings, in contrast to the illusory state of isolation cultivated and perpetuated by the legacy social institutions we have inherited from the 20th century. Darin and I explore the phenomenology of collective effervescence and how something magical happens when we create a particular vibe within a collective atmosphere that is inherently spiritual and thereby truly transformational for people, because it taps into ancient ancestral memory of a time where we danced to a drumbeat around a fire for hundreds of thousands of years before civilization even emerged. We talk about the privileges of being alive right now in the 21st century, in the age of self-discovery and the internet, and easy transportation to almost anywhere we want to go, and how people are exploring different ways of existing as a human being, and learning about what would truly make them feel fulfilled in this life. Finally, we discuss the potentials and limitations of the politicization of festivals, and how instigating deep personal transformation in individuals creates ripple effects that can cumulatively shift the entire zeitgeist in a more regenerative direction. The primary project we must be engaged in is helping people to unlearn all the toxic thought and behavior patterns that were installed into our brains by manipulative and malicious institutions in relatively recent past paradigms. Utopia is a place where people are healthy and secure, because with those baselines covered, kindness, art, and music emerge spontaneously. Humans naturally create beauty given the right circumstances, so look forward to more and more of that in the years to come. So thanks for joining us in this map-making endeavor to envision the path towards a world worth living in. Welcome everybody to Utopian Cartography. I'm here with Darin Leong, epic event producer and someone who's really inspired me in terms of, bringing the intellectual activism to the music festival space. So welcome, Darin.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me today.
So we'll jump into the philosophy of it all in a moment, but can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you got into this magical world?
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been producing shows for, I guess, 26 years now, so a long time. And it's seen a whole bunch of different renditions of this type of show, which is, kind of like this West Coast festival scene. And I started when I was 17, and I was going to raves, and I decided to throw some raves. And you can imagine what that was like as a 18, 19, 20-year-old.
You started throwing raves when you were a teenager?
My first rave was 17.
Right.
Yeah, even before I could sign a legal contract.
Right.
And by the time I was 18 and 19, we had actually built quite a following, and, on a regular basis throwing 800, 900 person shows. And by the time I was 19, 20, it started to be like 1,000, 2,000 person, warehouse shows in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, this was, like the late 90s, and kind of like the heyday of like the West Coast rave scene. I mean, it's still going on, but you should have seen it back then.
Right.
Because it was like it's good warehouse parties, good techno, and
I've heard
yeah,
epic things about about the '90s scene.
quite a scene. Yeah, so I did that for a long time, but as raves are wild, they're crazy, and we had someone die at one of our shows, and that changed a whole lot of things,
Right.
And it's been an evolution of like basically this big rave party scene, and then through a series of events forcing me to change and become more gentle, more elegant. And after that I locked myself into a cabin in the woods for 2 years and got my head straight. And then I joined another group called the Oracle Gatherings, which is founded by Isis Indria.
Right.
And she and I have known each other for a long time. And when I first came to see that, they had mixed a whole bunch of like cultural, spiritual, like different types of like she brought in a lot of ritual into these events and a lot more intention. So it wasn't just a raging party, and it was like bringing people together and kind of like creating a common vision and then doing a big ritual performance. And that was another shift, so it shifted from there. And then I started producing events on Orcas Island, where I currently live. And once again, we had to shift because we're on an island now, and we can't just do big, loud sound systems and stuff like that. And so the island itself kind of forced us to become even more gentle.
Right.
So it came from a really hard banging, party scene, and every shift it made became more, I guess, more grown up, more gentle. And then after a number of years doing that, we decided to produce the Imagine Festival, which is now in its 5th year on Orcas Island. And it is a version of the West Coast Transformational Festival thing that is basically the opposite of what a lot of these big festivals are. Our main stage closes because of the sound ordinance, but also, because that's kind of what we want to do is after we rage it up to a certain point, the loud stage shuts down, and then it opens up into a whole bunch of like smaller, gentle, acoustic, down tempo. So you imagine hanging out in a beautiful T-zone, watching some like epic, live music performance. It's just a different take on all of it, and I found that it's been good. Our community has been building around it, and because it's not a raging party, people can bring their kids. Older people can be involved, because ultimately, when people are going to these things, they're looking for like a tribal experience, dancing together and collective and stuff like that. And philosophically, what's evolved is that like, how can you actually have a tribal gathering without the tribe? It can't just be the young people. You got to have the older people, and you got to have the kids, and everybody in between. And yeah, so it's evolved into a community. So that's kind of where we're at now. And then beyond that, we also produce the Compass at Lightning in a Bottle, which essentially is bringing the spirit of activism and social change to like a large West Coast festival. And as you know, you've been there with us. I think it's had a pretty profound influence on a lot of these young people, and we bring in really, phenomenal speakers. This year we have Vandana Shiva, who, is leading the charge in India to fight companies like Monsanto and other multinational corporations. We've got Paul Stamets, who, has developed a way to combat the beehive colony collapse syndrome. Ayana Young from the wild. We've got planet experts, people talking about endangered species, the environment, stuff like that, and bringing it into like this kind of big party atmosphere. And the kids are totally receptive to it. They're ready to hear this stuff. And so, we did that at Imagine too. And so that's sprung forth the interest in bringing forth ideas about the future, about like what a future paradigm might look like. And we just, launched the Magic Convergence in March, which, so stoked you were able to attend, which is a conference. It's a conference about bringing new ideas forth. Like, what is a new world going to look like, and whether it be science, culture, interpersonal relationships, we're exploring all these ideas on how we can change and adapt to the changes that we're going to be seeing in the world. So yeah, it's been a long journey,
Right.
but it's been really good, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm really happy to see where we're at now and how things are unfolding.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's part of what I love about these festivals is because they're like they instigate imagination. Now that's why I love that your festival is called Imagine. And I was wondering about your process of coming to that name, because I know that the name of things is I place a lot of importance on it because it sets an intention for the whole how the whole thing unfolds.
The name is actually, it's named after John Lennon's song.
Right.
And
yeah,
it's actually, a personal story of mine that, like, I was a little kid when John Lennon was killed, and I was with my dad, and I'm from Thailand originally, so we were in Thailand. He grew up over here, so John Lennon was a hero of his. And when John Lennon was killed, he got the news over there, and he started crying, and he picked me up, and I was like, I think I was probably like 3 or 4 years old or something like that. And this is the story that he tells me. And he said that I looked at him, and I said, Daddy, why are you crying? And his response to me was like, a really good man was killed today. And that story always kind of stuck with me. And as I learned more about John Lennon, I learned more about that song. Oh, and that's after he said that, the song came on, like, on the radio. And so that story had always stuck in my childhood as an important memory. And when we were trying to think of a name for this event, it was like, what is it? Like, what is it we're trying to do here? And it's about imagining a new future. So the kind of the slogan of the Imagine Festival is Dreamers of the Future. And it's really about, like, what can we dream up? Because it's all a dream anyways. All of the earth came out of someone's imagination.
Right.
So what is it that we wanted to see? So what we wanted to see was, we wanted to see a world that was filled with art and music,
Mm-hmm.
because art really just, like, it heals, and then it also reinforces values. From what I've seen in my experience in life, it's just like a community that has art is a healthy community, has art, it has family, has community, all that. So that's what we were shooting for. We're shooting for the ideals that were, I think John Lennon was singing about in that song.
Totally.
And at the end of Imagine every year, we sing Imagine, the whole place, like,
right?
Like 1,200 people.
That's so awesome.
It's really fun.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that song is really epic because it gets at that it doesn't have to be like this, like the world doesn't have to be the way that it is or the way that they say it is, like we can imagine
it's just their version of it.
Right, exactly. And the extent to which it's been proliferated this long is the extent to which they've been able to suppress our imaginations about what else would be possible. And so I love that concept. And I actually I didn't know about until I was rereading the pamphlet from the program from Imagine Convergence, and the part about imaginal cells.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, what is that? And once I looked it up, it was almost like too good to be true that there's this. It just seems like one of the most beautiful metaphors of all time, that there's these cells within the caterpillar that aren't liquefied while the rest of the caterpillar is liquefied, and then they can use the pieces to rebuild a whole new organism,
transform.
Mm-hmm.
Metamorphosis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. I love that.
Yeah, we use that analogy because, like, we can change to be anything.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Like, and you've probably heard this before, that, like, the ones that have thrived, the ones that have survived, are the ones that have been able to adapt and change. Totally. Right? Not the ones who are rigid.
Right.
The ones that we cannot change.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so that's the thing. We can all see that we're in a time where everything's changing. Our social norms are changing, our spiritual beliefs are changing, the economy is changing, everything's changing, and you better be able to just see what's going on and kind of change with it,
right?
Because it's going to change regardless.
Right, exactly. That Darwin actually said later in life that when he had said survival of the fittest, he wished that he had said the survival of the most adaptable. Mm-hmm. That was the actual real key to survival and evolution is adaptation.
Adaptation, yeah.
And so I guess that leads into kind of what the next question, which is, we call these gatherings transformational festivals. And I would love to get your thoughts on, like, what is it in our consciousness that we're trying to transform with these, intentional gatherings where we're, focusing on art and the future and community and each other, like, because I think that's I try to explain that to people who haven't been to a festival, and they're like, what do you mean transformational? Like, it's hard to it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have any.
Sure, I do. Well, this is an interesting topic because there's a lot of layers to these gatherings about what exactly we're doing there.
Right.
And we lay the groundwork with one of the things. Okay. I'm going to be totally just like upfront about this, because this is, one of the things I think gets missed when people talk about transformational gatherings. And I know this may be a tricky conversation to have.
Right.
But the truth of the matter is these events are psychedelic events.
Right.
And the art and the music and the culture are really important. But the truth of the matter is that these events are shamanic events, and it's of course different than what you might think of in the past of what like a shamanic experience is like. But we're about to be 2020, and the truth is that people do psychedelics at our events. And what happens is, if you're familiar with psychedelics, is that it can induce a profound personal transformation. And it's to be really important to be said that, like, and this is actually one of the evolutions that we've had to go through as well, is that, like, after enough times of doing it, I was noticing that, like, the transformational part wasn't happening as much when you're just throwing a party.
Right.
When people are coming and just dancing and, getting high and whatever. People do have transformational experiences, for sure.
Right.
But what I found was that it happened a lot less than when it was just like real medicine work, And so one of the evolutions that has happened, at least in our circles, is that it's less of a raging party and more of a holistic experience of music, sound, experience, information, connection. And, I really feel like this is old stuff that we're working with here. Like, tribal gatherings have been happening since the beginning of time, and people have been eating mushrooms at tribal gatherings and dancing around the parties since the beginning of time. Right. And so, like, when you come to one of these events and, like, man, you just get, like, shaken out of your daily norm, that's the first part of it. And then the experience that you have, and if you're in a space that's, like, very caring and open and creative, these are not a lot of experiences that people get on a daily basis.
Right. Totally.
Daily life is hard.
Right.
And
people don't even smile at you on the street.
Totally. And to be able to just, like, really sit with somebody and authentically really connect with them, is transformational in itself. And if you stack all these experiences with, like, you're sitting with the most incredible artist now that you've ever seen in your life, and you're like, this band is blowing my mind right now, and then, like, I just met somebody that I've obviously meant to meet my entire life today, and my life may just be going on a different direction after this, plus,
Totally.
you throw in some psychedelic mushrooms on top of that, and you may have a transformational experience.
Exactly. And be transformed into something that you want to create that in the broader world, I feel like, because that's part of the thing, is like going back and forth between the festival world and regular default world. It's like this illustration by contrast. It, like, helps you see, like, what's wrong with the world, because you can see what's right with the world at festivals.
Sure.
And you can be like, oh, whoa, this is what society's fucking up.
Yeah, right. Kindness is great.
Right.
And for the most part, when you go to these festivals, people are very open. And here's the other thing that I think is transformational for people, is that, like I was mentioning, the human experience for the entirety of all of the human experience up until like 100 years ago was tribal.
Right.
Like, we were with our families, we were with our friends, we did everything together.
Right.
We went and looked for food together. And in our modern life, we're alone.
Right.
We might have our partner or whoever we're with and our group of friends or whatever. But I think that a lot of the ills that our society is seeing right now, like of the depression and loneliness and anxiety, this is my opinion on it, but it essentially comes from not having like that human connection and support structure around you. Yeah, you're gonna be anxious if you don't have anybody to look got your back.
Right.
You know, if you got your entire family, you know, like make sure that you're gonna be fed and whatever, you're gonna feel a whole lot better.
Right. Totally.
And so, you know, when people come to these festivals, it's, you know, it's a modern neo-tribal sort of experience where they come and they cook together and create projects together. Like when you come and work with us, you know, like, you know, we like doing things together.
Right.
You know, and we feel good to do things together. So, you know, yeah, and that in itself, you know, for people to be able to experience that, the camaraderie and just like creating big projects together, not just for money, because this is what we're inspired to do.
Right.
You know, it opens things for people and makes them excited. And I always come out of it feeling great, you know, and super thankful of the people that I get to meet and spend time with.
Totally. So, and the other part of that is that, like, what do you think separated us, I guess, from that tribal existence, you know, in the past 100 years? My interpretation is that it was so that they could sell us everything. And, you know, if each person is separate, then each person needs their own wrench and barbecue. And, you know, every last little thing, every person gets to buy their own of it, rather than just having one of the communities sharing.
I mean, they've been doing this a long time, man. Like, the Catholic Church has been breaking up tribes for a long time across the world.
Totally.
You know, across Europe, across Asia, across America. That's their model.
Right. And they get to town, and who's the shaman? Let me get that guy first.
Yeah. Yeah. And they just break up the family structure and break up the tribal structures. All the old beliefs are deemed evil.
Right. Totally.
And, you know, we've had thousands of years of that now.
Right.
You know, and so, I mean, it's created the world we have, it's created the civilization we have, so it is what it is, you know. But it is also a model that has been used to break up cultures. And then beyond that, I don't know if you've ever seen a movie, it's actually 3 movies called Century of the Self.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's about this guy Edward Bernays.
Right.
And Bernays was
Freud's
nephew.
Right.
And he created public relations. Right. The idea of public relations. He ended up getting hired. His first big gig was being hired by Marlboro, right, to see how he could market cigarettes to women. And he's the one who came up with that whole ad campaign, like, you know, the black and white commercials of women smoking cigarettes, you know, like making this like a classy, beautiful thing for these women to smoke cigarettes, you know?
Right.
Well, that was a hit. And so he kept going with that. And basically they came up with this idea, and it actually became a branch of the government, that they would create this consumer society, and they would do this by manipulating culture. You know? And their whole thing was Century of the Self, right? Was the idea was that, like, to make everybody more self-centered.
Totally.
So just think about me. What do I have? What is, you know, how can I win? How can I achieve?
Right.
And then essentially broke up the Western family model.
Right.
You know, so now that we don't even have our tribes, they just like broke up the whole family. You know, and created this entire culture of like self-centered, materialistic people in order to create consumers for these corporations.
Right.
So the whole thing was done intentionally.
Right.
For a long time.
Right. Exactly.
You know,
and like a lot of people try to say that's human nature. Like that's a big argument for, you know, against a lot of good ideas about, you know, how we should function as a collective and, you know, care about each other and, you know, work together. People are like, oh no, it's just our nature to, you know, be separate and like only out for ourselves and like to push everybody else down to get ourselves up. Like they say that's our nature. And I'm just like, but for millions of years, like we stood up 4 million years ago, and like we couldn't survive on it as our rugged individuals in the Ice Age and whatever. Like,
well, humans have done a good amount of subjugating each other too, though. So, you know.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we work together just to
subjugate some other people.
Right. Totally. I guess that's what corporations are.
Right. It's exactly what corporations are. Totally. Yeah. they're just like, they're just sneakier about it.
Right.
Make it just seem like, hey, so they're just like, yeah, this is normal. One of the things the Convergence is trying to do with all the ideas is that, like, just to put the concept out there that this isn't reality. This is just a version of reality.
Right. Totally.
And you can do anything.
Right. Yeah, I feel like that's one of my favorite things about festivals. It's just like this epic display of all the different ways to be human. Other than this one, prescripted way that they tell you, they bang into your head for 10, 20 years in school.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not living life like this, then you're a failure.
Yeah, wear this collared shirt.
Right.
Wear a necktie. But man,
wear a noose around your neck.
I got my degree in anthropology, and I was lucky enough to be able to like travel around the world and see these different cultures. And I swear to God, man, it's everything under the sun out there. Like if you go to any of these tribal cultures, they're doing some freaky stuff. Crazy tattoos, big, piercings and all that stuff. That's how humans have been.
Right. Totally. Yeah. Now the things that the church has done over the past thousands of years to just like crush all the cultural diversity in the world, like it boggles my mind.
Yeah, so I like your point though about it allows for people to come and do their diverse thing,
right.
And even the headdress thing, where people have a problem with the headdress thing,
right.
I look at that, all these kids wearing the headdresses at the festivals, but I also see these kids. It's like they're looking for this old tribal something,
exactly,
and this is what they've got,
right.
Or at least they know, and
totally, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess I'm hesitating about whether to. I have a spiel about that. I don't think culture can be I don't think it should be property or owned by anybody. I don't think there should be boundaries on anything. So, but that's I guess conversation that we don't need to get into, I suppose. So I don't know. So I'm just like,
we can get into it.
Yeah, there's like. Because the culture is just a series of memes, like just ideas that somebody had at some point to do something creative that was beautiful and interesting, and even if certain memes have association with certain, and I know the argument is that the white man came here and took everything else, so this just feels like another last thing that they're taking some last thing. So that's why I hesitated so much to whether to say it because I try to check my privilege as much as possible, and I know that's a privileged concept. I guess at least that's what I've been told. But I fundamentally think that everything should be open to everyone. So when I see the young kids at festivals with headdresses, and sometimes I see people getting chewed out for it, and I feel for them because most of them don't know. They don't know, like, it's just feathers. It's just a fancy,
it's funny because like some cultures don't really care if you appropriate.
Right.
Like Buddhists don't care if you want to hang a tapestry of the Buddha on your wall, or
right.
I mean, they'll care if you use them as a doorstop.
Right.
But it's the fact that the native people here have gone through the genocide.
Exactly.
And they get offended by it.
Right.
So if they're offended by it, then probably shouldn't do it.
Right. Exactly.
But then again, the kids don't really know.
Right.
So it's a complex thing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and then at the other end of the spectrum, there's Islam, where that's even a principle that no one's allowed to depict the Prophet Muhammad.
Yeah, organized religion, man.
Right.
Doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right. So yeah, and so I guess speaking of which, being raised Catholic, I never really understood the rituals and stuff in liturgy. And then I studied theology in high school at a Catholic high school, and then I became an atheist after studying theology a bunch, and and so then I was like, okay, all these rituals that I've been like wondering what they mean my whole life, maybe I guess they're meaningless. And then I went to a rave, and I was like, oh, so I felt the connection with everyone so intuitively at my first rave, and I remember immediately feeling like, oh, this is what all those rituals were to be the opposite of this, like, and so I guess it depends on your mind state and what pharmacological enhancements it's gotten as to whether or not that people perceive that to be a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
But I totally perceive it to be a spiritual experience. Sure. Like,
well, I mean, you can reach a spiritual experience just dancing.
Right.
You know,
totally.
And then you throw on top of that some really powerful psychedelics, and it becomes a really powerful spiritual experience to be dancing in a crowd of,
Right.
1,000 people. The whole place is,
Right.
moving. And that was one of the things that really moved me. I remember in my early on when I'd gone to a rave, and you could feel it. It's so thick,
Right.
it's this atmosphere of like this collective energy, collective consciousness, and
Right.
they're all, entrained to the rhythm of the music, and you can feel it moving with the music. But later on, I was at a Christmas mass at St. Mark's Cathedral in Seattle one time, and there was just one point where everybody in the place had their eyes closed and they were in prayer.
Right.
And man, I'll tell you, it was thick in there too.
Right. Totally.
So it's like there is a phenomenon that happens with gathering humans together and having them have a common focus.
Right.
There is like a collective energy that's formed.
Right.
And if we really want to get into it, like at our events, once we have been able to cultivate that collective energy,
Right.
and you're in that field, then some interesting stuff happens.
Right.
Synchronicities start to happen,
Right.
and like connections start to happen, and things start getting a little magical,
Right.
And it's still to this day a phenomenon that I'm still exploring and thinking about and witnessing, and it's almost beyond description.
Right.
But there are times, whether it's on the dance floor or some other rituals or gatherings, where the energy is so thick that you can just almost reach out and feel it.
Right.
That's what I like to say when it's a good party. I'm like, damn, it's thick up in here.
Right.
You feel it.
I love that. And it's extra dope when there's fog and lasers.
Yeah.
See, I guess we kind of covered about like what is it about these like neo-pagan, like highly technological gatherings that feel so ancient. I've been doing it for thousands of years.
Yeah, I mean, there's a gathering that happens out in Tonasket, Washington, which is called Barter Fair. Barter Fair is a trip. Tonasket, Washington is way out there. It's over by Idaho, so it's like it's on a native reservation. So there's literally cowboys and Indians out there. People are walking on horses, and it's the whole region there in eastern Washington, which is really remote, and everyone comes to barter stuff, and trade, just like I'm sure people have done for thousands and thousands of years.
Totally.
It's like they gathered, everyone brings their wares, everything. They bring the stuff they've been harvesting and cultivating. Like you get all these really nice like honey wines, whatever,
Yeah.
And at night, it's like raging drum circle around this big fire. A super, like, this scene could have happened 1,000 years ago. There's guys in deerskin like pelts and dancing around this fire. It's not that fun for me, but I was looking at it and I was like, dang man, this is exactly the same thing that folks are doing in the city. It's just like this collective dance, and the truth of the matter is they were on mushrooms at Barter Fair too.
Totally.
And so like, yeah, there's something innate in the human psyche that longs for collective drumming, collective dancing. I think it may be because the drum was probably one of the few instruments we had for a long time.
Totally. That's a great point. I hadn't thought about that.
At night, what are you gonna do? Drum around the fire.
Yep, totally. That we harnessed fire 600,000 years ago, they say. So I wonder when the drum was invented, but
it's probably just a log somebody was beating.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Right, totally.
So and this is actually, I'm really glad that you actually are asking these questions, because it's kind of formulated in my mind as well. But really, if you want to talk about what we're trying to do, with the Imagine Festival and the Imagine Convergence, it's we're moving forward into the future. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is to reconnect with some of these ancient things that some of us have found are missing in our lives. Tribalism, tribal gatherings, drumming, dancing, medicine work, and at these gatherings was the exchange of ideas and like all this other stuff. And so we're just putting a modern twist on a very ancient human thing.
Totally.
I mean, back in the day, people would, you know, they would have gatherings, and that was when you would just get together just to meet someone to marry.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it was
Totally.
crucial to
Right.
the fabric of human society.
Right. Totally. Totally.
And if you look at it, modern society now, the closest thing that we've got in the mainstream default society is like a football game.
Right.
You know,
Totally.
that's about as sacred as we get.
Right.
Or church.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny that we, you know, just by bringing back these fundamental human things, it's having such a profound impact on people.
Right. Right. Totally. Yeah, I actually had an epiphany this morning, actually, that I was thinking about how, I think the last big transition in civilization that we had, you know, was 500-ish years ago, when the Renaissance transitioned into the Enlightenment. And so that was people seeing the way that European civilization had kind of collapsed, and they were trying to figure out, like, what did we lose that was so great about, you know, the ancient society and ancient Greece and stuff like that. And so they were able to bring in like ideas like the symposium and, you know, democracy and stuff like that back from Greece, which I conceptualize as before the church came in and destroyed all that, like before Rome conquered Greece and shut down all that democracy stuff. And so I was thinking how now because I think of this festival thing as a renaissance. I truly think we're in a rebirth of culture, of what it is to be human in an ancient way. And so I was thinking about how it's like we're reaching back even further, you know, like, you know, we're seeing like, why do we all feel so alienated and feel so alone, and things like, you know, that the best we can manage in terms of a, you know, big event is the sporting event, where I think football is a perfect example, because it's just like the giant guys just like put on helmets and bash into each other and everybody like, and people like literally get into like fans of one team get into fights with fans of the other team.
Over the game.
Yeah. It's because I think I feel like we've been at war for thousands of years. You know, like there's been this, you know, like people never want to go to war, but you know, there's been these forces in society that have been making us fight with each other. And I feel like now we're like trying to figure out, like, I think that's part of the like retribalization, is how do we like rediscover a cohesive sort of something that like, where we can have community again, like before all this war that's been happening for the past few thousand years.
Yeah. Well, it's why I live where I live.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
On Arcus Island. And I live on an island. And so, you know, you're on this rock with these people.
Right.
And you can't just like be anonymous, you know.
Right.
You can't just like act terribly and then leave.
Right.
You know, you act terribly, you're gonna run into that person again.
Right. Totally.
You know, over at the grocery store or whatever. And and so, you know, now that I've been there for so long, our crew, we've been together for 15 years.
Right.
Throwing shows together.
Yeah,
you know?
that's awesome.
And so like, it's rare. I probably wouldn't, you know, you could have your own tribe in the city, but it's been an interesting thing being on an island.
Right.
Where it's like, if you need something, you ask your friends, you ask your neighbors, and they, you know, we take care of each other, and everybody's super generous there, man, because like, for one, people are just kind and they have enough, you know, they're comfortable, so they're able to be generous.
Right.
But also because they know that like, if you ever need something, like if I ever need something,
Right.
I'm probably gonna have to ask someone else for it.
Right.
So now it's my turn to hook them up when they're in need.
Right.
Totally. And yeah, so it's been an amazing process of like, you know, because I grew up in Seattle and, you know, in and out of the club scenes and whatever, and it just man, it was so hollow.
Right.
I knew 1,000 people.
Right.
But I was lonely as fuck in that room.
Right.
You know.
Totally.
And you know, it's because I didn't have any real connections. And then when I was able to be on this island in this community of people, and like, you know, I still live there because of that.
Yeah, makes sense to me for sure. Definitely.
Yeah.
I don't even know any of my neighbors.
Yeah, right. But when you do, like my neighbor, the guy I live with, we've known him for 16, 17 years now.
Right.
And I just know if I ever get into any kind of trouble, I just have a whole lot of people there who cared.
Right.
You know, and it makes you feel like it's home.
Right. Yeah.
That's home.
Right.
You know, where you feel safe and connected to people and
right. Totally.
And that kind of thing. So it's hard to find, man. It's hard to find. And I've been around the world looking at all sorts of different places to live and all that stuff. And,
right. Totally.
you know, I choose to be on that little island.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I've heard people talking about how one of the shifts that's happening is that, and especially for the younger generations, but people in general are moving towards, spending their money on experiences rather than things. Like, I feel like it was more of a 20th century thing where people were just buying things, and that was the sign of, living a good life, was just like by having all these things and keeping up with the Joneses and all that. And it seems like part of that is kind of, I mean, it's still, the default world is still functioning like that in a lot of cases.
Sure, yeah.
But it seems like there's this shift to, people wanting to spend their resources more on experiences. That's why they're part of why the festival movement is growing so much, and why there's new festivals popping up every year. It's because people want to have these, peak experiences. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts on like why that shift would be. Is it just that it's evidently more fulfilling? Or do you get that sense that it is that shift is happening, I guess?
I think the shift is happening for some people.
Right.
Just kind of the same thing. It's like, man, this is like, you can't just say one thing is happening in the world. It's just like, it's all unfolding. Right. But I do feel that right now, in the first part of this century, it's an incredible time to be alive.
Right. Totally.
Like, I've gotten a chance to travel to a lot of different places in the world and see a lot of different things that, in the day, maybe they might have even just heard about in a storybook.
Right.
Totally. And so, like, we have, like, when we're actually one of the first generations. I mean, like, my dad had a chance for sure.
Right.
But, like, and I'm a little older than you, and we're some of the first people who are able to, like, I'm gonna go get on a plane and fly to Asia.
Right.
Go to South America.
Right. Totally.
And so people are doing it.
Right. Totally.
And there certainly still are a lot of people who are, following the corporate materialistic paradigm. But there's also, I think this is the time of self-discovery.
Right.
It's like the age of the internet,
right,
where you know that there's all this stuff out there.
Right.
And the age of cheap gas, where you can just go and, go to some other place. And so I'm one of those people that has always gone after experiences.
Right.
And I guess that's part of the whole transformational part of it. It's like people who like transformational experiences like to go do things like travel and do that kind of stuff. But I got to tell you, man, as I get older, I'm 41 now.
Right.
Starting to feel like I need to have some more resources and
totally
possessions and property and that stuff. So it's like different phases in life too. I'm definitely not trying to be part of this whole consumerist society.
Right.
And I'm trying to find a balance where I can, have my possessions and my experiences and have the least negative impact as I can, whether it be in the garbage I produce or the pollution we produce and psychic pollution or
totally. Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting question. It's all happening.
Right.
My hope is that, like, things shift in a way that away from the materialistic paradigm, because ultimately the materialistic paradigm is just turning nature into stuff. Right. So yeah, I hope we can get a check on that. And I'm gonna go back to psychedelics here real fast.
Yeah, that is a factor.
Because
that's a factor.
One of the things that psychedelics is really good for me at least, is that it's made me kind of really check in with my morality.
Right.
About the stuff that I'm doing in my life, whether it be the stuff that I'm putting into my body or stuff I'm putting into my psyche, and also the things that I do and how they affect the world. And what I found is that, like, part of that whole experience, that whole transformational experience, is actually just taking a good look at your life. And like, what is it I'm doing here?
Right. Totally.
And like, how am I affecting other people and how am I affecting the world? And it's definitely made me check in and really try to change myself on a conscious way.
Right.
Try to change. I'm not a perfect person, but it sure as heck makes me try the best I can.
Right.
Because if I do some shit that's not so cool, that I'm feeling guilty about, probably the next time I have a psychedelic trip, I'm gonna have to face it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of what a lot of religious people ask, like, you know, where do you get your ethics from if you don't believe in this? If you don't get it from the Bible, you're like, where could you possibly get ethics from? And a big part of it is from all my psychedelic experiences.
Yeah.
From confronting the
Mm-hmm.
consequences of what I have done in my life. So it definitely does shape what you want to
For sure.
do.
Yeah. And like, you go to these festivals and it's like, sometimes you hear some preachy stuff. One of the things we try not to do is we don't want to preach anything.
Right.
Because the philosophy behind it is like, we innately know.
Right.
You know,
Totally.
and it's worked.
Right.
You know,
Totally.
I mean, you can tell people what your expectations are about how we want everyone to act.
Right.
But we're not locking anyone up or
right.
whatever.
Right. Totally.
And amazingly, if you get enough people on the same vibe, they'll act right.
Right. Right.
You know, get them on an island too.
Right. Totally. I guess maybe I'll get to the last couple of questions.
Sure.
On that subject of what you said about avoiding being preachy, which in politics a lot, maybe that's what I've heard called moralizing. I was reading this book on shame by Brene Brown, and talking about how shame is actually not the most effective, way of influencing people's behavior. Because how political do you think the philosophical content of these festivals should get? Because
that's an interesting question.
Because on the one hand, I see how that being overtly political could turn some people off, that would otherwise be able to be transformed by some
not just turn people off. I mean, that's what happened in the 60s.
Right, totally.
I mean, that ended up with people rioting in the streets, cops breaking heads, and that kind of stuff.
And COINTELPRO and shit.
And it's an interesting thing, because the reason that this festival scene has been able to thrive is because they're not political.
Right, totally.
You know, if we started like taking up like, doing protest to fight, whatever, I mean, they would deal with us the way they deal with any other protest.
Right.
You know,
totally.
Pepper spray and dogs and whatever.
Right. Totally.
So, it's an interesting thing. So currently what we're doing with the compass, I mean, essentially, we just want to reach people,
right?
Because it's all about this personal transformation, right? We're also just individuals just doing the best we can to help, not here to lead a revolution. But I'd like to see, for example, like with the convergence, the different speakers and authors we have, we created some really nice videos from those.
Right.
So they're going to be like one-on-one interviews with these people. And some of them have some ideas that are pretty crucial, some ideas that can really, new ideas that can open some people's minds. And the whole idea behind it is to be able to record it, document it, and then get it out into social media and onto YouTube and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And we are going to be talking about change. We are going to be talking about political stuff.
Right.
But it's different in the sense that like we want the effect to be on a personal level as opposed to like this group change, because ultimately we're just part of this collective,
right?
And so like I used to be a big time activist, like I used to be like fenceling banks and big signs from the highway,
totally,
especially during like the Iraq wars with George Bush and all that stuff. And man, I'll tell you, the entire time I was doing that, I don't think I changed a single mind.
Right.
I was just out there yelling, just pissed about what's going on. Mm-hmm. And then what I found was that like being able to actually offer like a transformational experience for somebody, and then maybe offering, bringing some like really interesting thinkers to, be able to share ideas with people.
Right.
Those are the kinds of things that actually really affect people.
Right.
New ideas,
Totally.
And so something like these ideas that we're trying to put out there, like my hope and dream for this is that these videos go out wide,
totally.
And there's some kid out there somewhere, like in his bedroom, like looking at this video and going like, whoa, that idea is just totally changing my paradigm right now.
Right. Exactly.
And little by little, man, if we can do that, we just like collectively just keep doing that, the collective will shift with it.
Right.
And we just play our little part to do it.
Yeah.
But it is also something we're like passionate about.
Right.
In order to do this, we have to do it.
Right.
you know.
Yeah, totally.
And so it's big production, lots of work and all that stuff. And ultimately, you know, I don't know how far the reach goes. I don't know who's really being affected by all of it. I just trust in it that out, you know, we just keep doing it. We keep putting it out there, and there are people having life-changing experiences because of it.
Totally.
So,
yeah, and to go out there and approach the world in the way that they learned modeling, you know, like they saw people that they liked and, you know, wanted to be more like that. That totally makes sense.
totally. Yeah, be an example.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I love that. So I guess maybe to close it out, the last question is, love to hear one paragraph synopsis of Utopia as you see it.
Utopia?
Yeah, what do you think are the most important aspects of a society that was worth like trying to get to?
Oh man, Utopia, you know what? Utopia is a place where people are kind and conscious.
Right.
And conscious, when I say conscious, I mean they have an understanding of things. Like one of the things that the Buddha said was that a cause of suffering was ignorance, not understanding. You know, and if you don't understand, you continue to not understand, you continue to suffer, you know. And so like a society that was utopian would have a population that was educated, that like was open to discussion and really respectfully working things out. And I mean, if we want to talk about it in a, I guess, political sense, I mean, it's really a matter of like resources too, you know. You can't have people who are desperately poor and starving if you want a utopian society.
Right.
Like people have got to be fed.
Right.
They've got to be able to be healthy and safe. And I don't know how we get about doing that because there's so many, you know, factors involved. And honestly, what it really boils down to is the cause of all the problems in the world right now is greed. You know, it's really some people hoarding all the resources from other people.
Right.
And so it's really like a moral thing.
Right.
And I don't know how you convince anyone else to get rid of their money or help other people or anything like that. I mean, like I said, it's kind of got to be this whole continual change of society.
Right.
The other thing that I would say was utopian society would be in support of art and music. You know, where like it was normal for the family on a weekend to be like, you know what, let's go to the festival. Right. And they would all get in their outfits and head out and dance and meet people, and you know, and then the kids could go learn how to paint from this painter, you know, and they be inspired to play music by this musician. But like I was saying before too, you can't really get to that point until you have a society that has their basic needs met. Because until then, you're just thinking about getting your basic needs met. And but I've seen it though, when you get to the point where people have community, people have enough to eat, people have security, what happens is art and music spontaneously start showing up. Totally. You know, and you could always judge the health of a community by what their art and music looks like, because it's reinforcing the values of the society too, what's happening in the music and the art, and at the same time it's reflecting the values. And so like, yeah, a utopian society would be a society where people were safe, healthy, practicing art, practicing music, and the rest they can work out themselves. Like, totally. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that is awesome. That's definitely a vision I share too.
Yeah.
So,
well, we're in this together.
Right.
So keep working at it.
Exactly.
And yeah, thank you.
Hell yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's been an amazing conversation.
Thanks, man. Well, we'll have more on site.
Yeah.
LIV.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Yeah, but I'm glad that the world gets to hear this one. So, yeah, everybody, thanks for tuning in. If you've been enlightened as to what this whole transformational project is that we're trying to do in the world and why we're trying to get more consciousness to the people. And so I guess with that, I'll wrap it up. So thanks for watching.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
we gotta be tricksters, warping existence within this system, and often trick them with hidden wisdom. They miss to listen. Talk to them essentially, sensically, metagnostic elementals, splitting the inner nexus, frictionless fission and reflections like time crystals to link lost interconnections with divine sistren and kindred sentience, non-binary listed in messages of hidden traditions, never respected or honored by insidious lecherous bigots. Yet we are indigenous essences and spirits totemic with mystery lectures, lessening fear and dejection, palest projections of seers and messengers, reared by hectic and eerie guests of destinies like Lyria, McKenna, and feminist and queer theorists, academics and mythicists, activist professors with queries of eclectic and magical fictions, scientifically prescient, near manifesting. Clearly we answer questions and question the answers, festering myriad cancerous pests within us. Can't you just get this? You can, yes, but not with bantering gestures against the manic depressive. The panic will lessen with mantras as weapons. No mansions and riches, just handsome medicines from plants and minerals, replenishing and tantrically sideral, vivid depictions, yantrically literal for cancers, withering fruits and beans, fruitful dreams, dancing an interim from a lost seraphim to a lost cherubim. The true scene is as antic as Syrians and the goddess's variants. 1 to 2 courses for nourishment, no more for symbiotically curing you. Whole foods for soul beauty, fostering and nurturing foods. Raw superfoods for noble growth. Total wholeness is a global goal, with moods, beauty of soul and heart, mind and psyche. Soothing and dutiful, non-spinal chakras are 12 for Anunnakis, yet they are endless like Nadis and Marmas. Enter the 36 chambers and bardos, but remember, your body is cosmic and multidimensional. It's a glowing arc like Noah's. Zeus for the earth and nature is goddess. We are not cursed with hatred, patriarchal, like reversed ancient Torahs and Bibles born from Sumer. The New Testament's apostles like Paul that are misogynists, heartless and clueless imposters. RBG like test their logic and leave read the rest of the Paul, deaf in their auras and blueprints. We breathe weed in Mapacho, tobacco, plant teacher students. Be healthy like that skit speech and music from Prodigy or Let's Get Free. I grew up on Tupac, Mobb Deep and Nas. That's why you see me in the street, guys, but I seek solace, and it greets me when I eat wisely. That doesn't mean no sweets though, just vegan and wild. See, to me it's no processed treats and garbage like GMO toxins. A lot of spring water, earth tea and coffee. They're all non-profit like Tibet's orphanages. Free Tibet from China, the first Earthship Academy will be on Salt Spring Island. Maharishi prediction, ask Rishi G7 on Rudraksha or Imam Ali Dahesh. What we breathe is destiny, reborn from scripts, timeless speeches and weaponry. Anti-colonial, anti-systemic, neuro-linguistic. We lead peace psychokinetically, passive and active chi recipes like Tai Chi and Muay Thai hybrids, effortlessly guiding limbs in synchronicity. Why be blinded from violence? Open your mind's eye instead and rise up instantly. Why cry in dread and horror? Be eye-town like dreaded roster women and empress men, and don't be headless horsemen. Revolution doesn't fail to come when the system is toxic. Get this in progress. Rebel troops and hells in the slums are destined to evolve, yes. Yet we all hail from the one duality of Trinity. The 4 directions of Dharma's medicines, shamanic, empowering infinity and levels of sentience. Respect men and women, yes, but not cowards. The belittle every gender and genderless beyond this like Taoists. That's raw therapy and matriarchal power. That's the goddess verily like Kuan Yin and Mahakali. Namo Yaoshi, the Tirthankaric aliens, quantum and Raquel Flora, Maoris, Romanis, Moorish and Islamic oracles. Balls and the Gauris, Sadhus, Nagas and Sadhvis, Sadhs and Swamis, non-binary watchers and wildkin. Totemic and shamanic, no system of society can hold us prisoners with soulless religions and sadistic liars controlling our visions and conscience, our senses and offspring. We are limitless hybrids, far beyond perceptions and guises. We are limitless hybrids, far beyond perceptions and guises. Open your eyes and be wiser. Open your ajna. And all of the chakras forgotten. They are not just 7 like the levels of heaven. Don't forget the 8 is infinity. Your fates are limited, but destinies are